Run, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run to the city of refuge. I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run to the city of refuge. I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run to the city of refuge. I'm gonna run.
Hello and welcome to Christian Perspectives. I'm Bob O'Halloran, and of course with us is the pastor of Portage United Methodist Church, Reverend Tom Countryman, who helps us to explore some of those mysterious questions we've always wanted to know. And one of the things that struck me is that in your sermons, Pastor, and many others, you'll give the historical background of a certain biblical event. How important is it that we know some of the historical background?
You know, I actually think that it's pretty critical because the things we read, if we don't know what they mean in context, if we don't know what they meant historically, it's really easy to get them wrong, to misinterpret them, and to assume they're something other than they are, or that they apply in a way different than maybe was actually intended.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. When I was a kid, growing up Catholic, it was really common for the women to come into the church and have what, to my mind, was a doily on their head. It was, and they were paper and they were available. So, I mean, I remember my mom like pulling a little Kleenex out of her purse and folding it up and pinning it to her head, and of course some of the women who were more well prepared for this had like a veil that they would put up on their head. I had no idea what this was about, but it was really, really common. If you go into certain churches like a Pentecostal church or an African American church, you will see that the women always have a lot of hair and are always wearing hats, what President Obama recently referred to as church hats. So the thing about this, the place where this comes from, is a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he tells them that it's shameful for a man to pray with his head covered and shameful for a woman to pray with her head uncovered. And in fact, Paul goes on to describe how her hair, a woman's long hair, is her glory, and if she's going to uncover her head, well, she might as well have her head shaved. And so that's where this idea comes from, that women should wear a hat in church and that men shouldn't. And so when you read this, you go, oh, well, I guess that we should do that. And so you have this as a practice in the modern church. The thing is, when Paul is writing this, Paul is a Jew.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly, which means as a Jew, he would have prayed with his head covered, pulling the prayer shawl up over his head. And he's saying that it's shameful for a man to pray with his head covered, and yet Paul himself as a Jew would have done this routinely. Paul says that it's wrong for a man to have long hair. Women should have long hair, men should not have long hair, and yet in the Bible we hear about Samson who has long hair, and Paul himself participated in the, it's called a Nazirite vow, for a period of time that involved growing the hair long. So if you don't know that historically, if you're not aware of just sort of that really basic fundamental thing about Jewish practice, you wouldn't catch the inherent contradiction. Paul is telling these people to do and making a big deal out of it. And yet it's a practice that doesn't apply to him, to Jesus, to the other apostles, to what in fact people did back then. And so what that tells you, when you realize that, when you realize the historical perspective, what you recognize then is that Paul is speaking very specifically to a very specific church.
This has been Christian Perspectives, and for Pastor Tom Countryman, I'm Bob O'Halloran. Remember, God loves you, and so do we.